Hello, this is Billie Tarascio, owner of Modern Law. We're a family law firm in Phoenix, Arizona, with offices throughout the state. We have attorneys who can help you with every aspect of your family law case. We also have a legal clinic run by students for those of you who need budget-friendly resources, and we have lawyers who've been practicing for more than 20 years. Collectively, Modern Law has more than 200 years of legal experience. So when you hire Modern Law, you're not just getting an attorney, you're getting a team. If you live in Arizona and need representation, call us today. That's 480-649-2905 or visit us at mymodernlaw.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Modern Arizona podcast. Today I am joined by Scott Smith, candidate for Mesa mayor. And Scott, welcome to the show.
Well, Billy, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you here. So you have served as a Mesa mayor before. You were mayor from 2008 to 2014. Is that right?
That's correct. 6 years. Really enjoyed it. Had a lot of success, and to me, being a mayor is one of the greatest opportunities to serve that there is in politics.
Well, you made an impact, right? So 2008, economic crisis, right? Things are not going well in Mesa in 2008, but you had a pretty successful 6 years.
Well, thank you. I took over as mayor on the first week in June in 2008. And it was about 4 or 5 weeks later that the city manager and the chief financial officer of the city said they needed to meet with me. And they went, so this is like the end of June, 1st of July. They came into my office and they went over the financial data and the sales tax collections for the first half, 6 months of 2008. And there was a stark reality that our revenue stream had fallen off the cliff. And we were in the depths of the Great Recession. And we're talking about, $65+ million in revenue loss because the economy just crashed, it died. And Mesa, because of its revenue stream, relies to a great deal on sales tax collections. And when nobody's buying anything, you get no revenue. So we had to deal with that crisis. There was no way to make up revenue. You had to adjust your operations and your spending to meet the realities. And we went through some very difficult, painful times. We reduced staff by almost 15%, froze wages, did a lot of other things to get us through that crisis. But we also did something else that was very unique for cities. We didn't just react to the crisis. We said, okay, we're going to use this as an opportunity to build the foundation, to lay a foundation for when this ends, because it will end. And so, a couple of 3 years later, when we started moving out of the Great Recession, Mesa had streamlined its operations, had created opportunities, had invested in infrastructure, saved literally well over $100 million in infrastructure investments. And we were well positioned to take advantage of the opportunities, whereas other cities were still trying to adjust to the Great Recession. And I believe that set the stage for an unprecedented 10 years of growth in jobs and economic activity and investment in Mesa. And it all started with a very, very severe economic downturn that we decided to not just survive, but to thrive. That was our mantra.
And what made you decide to run for mayor the first time?
Well, actually, it was really it's an interesting question. I had never been involved in politics directly. I'd worked on a couple of campaigns. My father was superintendent of schools in Mesa, so I was very much aware of the public service and been around politicians my whole life, office holders, but I never intended on getting directly involved in politics. And then I sold my company in 2007. I left the employment of my company, and I had some pretty challenging experiences with cities around the valley. I was in construction, and especially the city of Mesa, and I was very unhappy with my experience. I said, this is ridiculous that I'm trying to excel, and it seems like every time I turn and try and do something well and nicer, I'm running into a bureaucratic mess that puts a lid on what I can do, or else changes rules midstream and all this stuff. And I was talking to a friend who was involved in politics, and she said, Scott, I'm tired of hearing you complain. You either need to put up or shut up. There's an election coming up. Mayor Keno Hawker was turned out. You need to run for mayor. And I just sort of laughed at it. But after a while, I said, she's right. I'm now basically retired for the first time because I was without a job because I'd sold my company. And I decided to put my head in the ring, and I won. And I think I went into office very naive as to politics and how it worked, which was, I believe, my greatest advantage. I was naive, but I was very well experienced in running large organizations and dealing with the business world. And that helped me out. That helped me out going in because I didn't know what you couldn't do. So, and then the Great Recession hit, and I took the same principles that I'd used to go through many recessions in business, especially in home building, and I just applied that philosophy. Now, government is very different than business. Let's be straight. Whenever someone says I'm going to run the government like business, I don't buy it. But the principles of leadership, the principles of change are similar, and in many ways exactly the same. And so I just applied those, and luckily I had a good staff, good leadership, and a good council to work with, and they grabbed onto many of those things, added their own positive ideas and suggestions, and we made it work. And I have to say that being the mayor was the most rewarding career, if you want to call it career, time in my life because we could make a difference.
Okay, so not to get us too far off track, but the statement that you made where government is not like business. So I'm a business owner. Everything I look at is through the business owner lens. Why can't the government just run like a business?
That's a great question. Like I said, it's not that the principles of leadership don't apply. It's just that government exists for a different reason. Business exists to provide a service or a product and to make a profit. You have to make a profit to stay in business. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, you're driven by providing a superior product or business so you can stay in business.
Sure. Government
exists for a very different reason. And that is government exists primarily to protect our rights, to protect us. 75% of City Mesa and most cities' budget is allocated to public safety, police, fire, the courts. And that's the first thing. Then it exists to provide services that others collectively that just make sense. Water, streets, traffic signals, those types of things. It isn't there to make a profit. It isn't there. It will stay in business no matter how good or bad it is. And what you find is that when you're in business, you have to take risk. You have to take. Hopefully, it's not unreasonable risk. It's calculated risk. And government is completely risk adverse. And the reason, and that was the one thing I had to learn is when I got in there, I had these ideas. I said, let's try something new. And I realized that most people in government said, why would I do that? I get in trouble when I do things right. When I do something wrong, everybody lines up to really take their punch at me and their pound of flesh. And so I realized that whereas in business, you can take these risks and then you can reward your workers and your employees for taking those risks, because if you have a winning product or something, you can give out bonuses, you can give promotions, you can give stock, whatever you want to reward that. That doesn't exist in government. Really, taking risks is all about doing things better, more efficiently, but there's very little upside for a government employee to change the way they're doing it. Nobody got fired for doing something the way they've done it for 10 years. And it was hard for me to realize that I needed to use a different type of encouragement and reward for the City of Mesa employees, because the things I used in business just didn't work. The thought process was different. Sometimes you do things in government that are willfully inefficient because you don't want to move too fast, because you have to take into account the rights of every citizen. If you're in business, you can cast off those bad customers. You can't do that in government. You represent everybody. And that sounds like a minor deal, but it is very, very significant in how you arrive at policy and how you incentivize government workers. And that's our frustration, is that, oh, why can't government operate more like business? Well, government actually is set up. And in our Constitution, government is set up to be inefficient. And that's because when government is inefficient, it has to be sure of what it does, and that's how rights are protected. Is if and that, so that's why it's very different. So there's many principles of leadership that apply. Treating people right, doing the right thing, recognizing our purpose, defining our purpose. But how government operates is very different than a business operates, and that creates real challenges, because what that means is that when you are trying to bridge the gap between you and a business person and a government employee, a bureaucrat, many times they are speaking completely different languages. And I find that's one thing I bring to the table, is that I've been in both worlds. So I can tell the government person, hey, listen, here's what the business person really wants to accomplish. They just don't know how to describe it to you. And I can tell the bureaucrat, hey, listen, this person, this company wants to do something right, but they don't understand how rules and regulations really work. See, in business, you can bend the rules. As long as you're not unethical or lack integrity, you can bend rules, and sometimes you need to bend the rules to be successful. In government, you can't bend rules. If a law exists, if an ordinance exists, you have to follow that, even if it's a bad law. And you have to follow it, because you can't just ignore things that have been enacted. And so what you need to do is learn how to work within the framework, make it work for as many people as possible, and that's the big difference. I know that was a long answer, but it really fascinates me. And one of the things I enjoy is trying to bridge that gap between the business world and the government world.
What made you decide to run now?
For many of the reasons why I ran before, I had gone on after I was mayor and served 6 years as the CEO of Valley Metro, retired a little over 2 years ago, and was very happy in my retirement. I had no intention of getting back into government, but I had people who started calling me and said, listen, many of the things that you accomplished, especially with the city bureaucracy, have gone by the wayside. That's normal. Government is built to regulate. And if left alone, it will sort of move toward the lowest common denominator, which is regulate. And that's not overly bad, because rules are made for health, safety, and fairness. But if the process becomes overburdening, then economic activity is stifled. And I heard from many people who called me and said, listen, Mesa used to be my favorite place to do business. I won't go there anymore. It's just unresponsive. They had many complaints. And I started looking into things and noticing that while Mesa as a community has been on an upswing for the past decade, there are many areas that I believe they've stagnated. They've become complacent. We as a city and as a city government. I started thinking about and looking at those who were running, and I honestly did not have confidence that they would be the kind that could instill the changes that we need to make sure Mesa continues on an upward swing. And now that I have grown children and I have grandkids who will now grow up in this city, they all live in Mesa, I was really worried about their future. And I love this city and the opportunities it's given me and my family. And once again, I felt like, it's time to put up or shut up. I may worry about it, but I got to get involved. And I may or may not be able to make the changes that I talk about, but I would kick myself if I was standing on the sidelines. And that's why I decided to throw my hat in the ring.
I want to get your perspective on the parallels and differences between 2008 and now, because there seem to be some parallels. What are your thoughts on that?
There are, and yet it's a very different scenario. First of all, in 2008, City of Mesa was, I believe, sort of at a low point. There was a disconnect between the city council and the city. There was a lot of infighting. The city council was frankly very unpopular for a variety of reasons. And the city to me, was sort of in a funk. Then we hit the Great Recession, and we were really thrown huge, real challenges that we worked out of. And so I felt like I felt like if, I'm a football coach that's taking over a team that had a couple of losing seasons. There's nowhere to go but up. I've through my career, I've become sort of a workout artist, an executive, taking companies that had huge challenge and building them. Great Recession came, and we had to change the way we did business. We were forced to. And I really enjoyed that challenge. And it was a very uplifting, even though it was difficult, it was an uplifting challenge. And then to walk away when I did, feeling that Mesa was on and turned the corner, there was renewed optimism. Mesa citizens felt good about the community. We had set the stage for, like I said, economic growth and community growth. And we've basically continued that for 10 years. Now, people are fairly satisfied with the way the city is delivering basic services. And in some ways, that's created a complacency. So I'm not walking into what I believe is a failed or a distressed organization. I run into an organization that is on very solid grounds. And the citizenry, across the valley, cities have had success. Our economy's grown. We've had a lot of new investment. We couldn't get a site selector to show a property in the city of Mesa in 2008 and 9. And we actually got Apple to invest $1 billion sort of by a lucky set of circumstances. Well, now in Mesa, we've had multi-billion-dollar investments from Apple and Meta and Alphabet and Microsoft, and Mesa is no longer on the no-show zone. We are a preferred place for people to look and invest. It's a different world I'm stepping into. To me, this is more of a course correction than a reclamation project. Okay. That success has bred, I believe, complacency. And when you get complacent, you get a bit lazy, and when government gets a bit lazy, it falls back into the regulate. And we had instilled the culture of facilitate, don't regulate, help people to succeed as opposed to just telling them no. And in many ways, city government has lapsed back into that regulate first. And so it is different. The politics now are also vastly different than 2008. I mean, we are so divided, and there's so much anger, not directed toward the city per se, but directed toward politics and toward the national mood. There used to be an old saying, Temple O'Neill, from representative, former speaker, used to say, all politics is local. That's been turned on its head. Most politics now is national. I get asked more in the mayor's race about what do you think of Trump-Harris and Gallego Lake than I get asked about what do you think of the city of Mesa and their zoning policies and their public safety policies. And that's unfortunate because there's so many important things that are going on the local level. The other thing that's very different is the death of local media. When I ran in 2008, Mesa had 2 daily newspapers and a weekly newspaper, and almost a dozen reporters who worked specifically on Mesa issues. Now there are no daily papers. They've gone online mostly. Nobody gets their paper delivered to their driveway and reads it. And so people in many ways are very, very low information when it relates to city issues and city government. And for somebody who's running in a city as big as Mesa is, that's a real challenge because it's a much more lower information voter out there simply because there's not the news outlets that tell people what's going on. And Mesa is so big to run a comparable campaign to cities our size, such as Minneapolis, Atlanta, St. Louis. Those mayor's races, the candidates spend millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That just isn't, we just don't have those kind of resources available to us. And so, before I could rely on the newspapers and my opponents because there were multiple forums and multiple articles, and everybody was pretty much had a way to find out what's going on. Not the case anymore. So, other than doing podcasts and the 2 or 3 forums we do, people basically focus on the national issues as opposed to local issues.
I think that's true. So I'm in Gilbert, and the whole reason we're talking about this is because Gilbert local issues blew up, and there wasn't enough information. And I happened to be talking about it, and people wanted to talk about it. So,
and that's the case. You usually now when people get engaged in the communities because something bad happens,
right?
And that happened. And Gilbert as a community is interesting. Is different than Mesa. It's still smaller. There's still a more informal and active communication network, a web in Gilbert. Mesa is 145 square miles, right, and over 500,000 people. And a lot of it's grown so fast and so quickly. But you're right. In the past, people, even in Gilbert and in Mesa, would be very up to date on the daily doings, comings and goings in their city. Now it takes a huge event, something that in the case of what Gilbert went through, something horrific, something that was grabbed by the local media, specifically the television stations, and then led the news for days and weeks. Then all of a sudden, people were engaged,
Right.
And that's unfortunate because there's that it would take that type of event to get people thoroughly engaged in their city.
Right. So you were describing the difference in the economy between 2008 and now, and economically, big picture, things are good now, relatively speaking, to 2008.
Relatively speaking, we have low unemployment, wages
Right.
are rising. Of course, you have all the
Businesses
other,
are coming
but
here.
relatively speaking, yeah.
There's investment and the
Yes.
stock market's going up. However, individuals are hurting economically. And so there's this disconnect between big economy and little economy. And it is one of voters' primary concerns. What does a Mesa mayor, because I realize like your role is not, I'm not going to ask you national issues, but what can a Mesa mayor do about that issue?
That's a great question, because I think sometimes the expectations are beyond it. And we'll look at one issue that has come up that has never been an issue in Arizona, and that's housing affordability.
Yes.
We used to, for literally decades and decades, tout ourselves as a low-cost place to do business and to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I never, ever doubted that even my children would be able to grow up and follow the same path I did, be able to afford a house, buy a house, and stay in Mesa. That happened in California. That happened in Massachusetts. That happened in other places, and we would deride them. That happened in liberal places where they had bad policies. And then all of a sudden, and this is really a hangover from the Great Recession, I will tell you. I understand a lot of the economics of home building because I was a home builder for 14 years and got out right before the Great Recession. But I can tell you that there are macroeconomic issues that define the home building market and have defined affordability. So what can the Mesa mayor do? Not a whole lot. I can't decide what mortgage interest rates are. I can't decide really the influx of people coming in here, which puts the supply and demand curves completely out of whack. And when you have a low supply and a very high demand, you're going to have higher prices. So what we do as a mayor is you try to find little niches, things we can do. You can't ignore it because there are some things we can do. Housing, for example, I have some very specific ideas to utilize old commercial or failed commercial or struggling commercial spaces, which are not zoned for residential, and somehow to use those and not to just change to residential zoning, because that's not going to solve the problem. Because what happens is if you take an old strip center, let's say, that's boarded up, and you tell the owner, oh, by the way, you can now have residential zoning, that land now goes on a market and there's a bidding frenzy and the price of the land goes through the ceiling because you got 6 home builders bidding on it, and it makes it impossible to build affordable houses. So my plan is to take these old underutilized, whether it be commercial, industrial, or different types of residential, and offer an incentive to the owner that says, listen, I will allow you to change to residential, but you've got to do this. You've got to cap the price of the land. You've got to put some things in there that don't allow speculators to come in and buy. Because the cost of land is the only component in a home price that is completely uncontrollable by the builder. I know what it's going to cost me to build, to frame, to put roof on, to put sheetrock on. I know what the sales taxes and the title fees. We know what the mortgage financing costs are. What we don't know is what that land, and that land can be anywhere from 25 to 30% of the total cost of a house. And I can't control that because that is usually based completely on market conditions. Mm-hmm. And what we see now, and the reason why prices have gone up so much, is that land is so much more expensive because you have a limited supply of land. Regulation has stifled the quick development, And you have a lot of big New York Stock Exchange companies bidding on this land, and they're all bidding it up. And once they pay exorbitant price for the land, there's no way they can build a house. So if we as a city can work with developers and landowners, not developers, landowners, to give them, and the incentive is we will take your unproductive property that you're making nothing on, and we will make it so that you can develop it, put housing in, but it's got to be housing that can be affordable, which means we're going to cap what you can do, some things that add to the cost, and hopefully that will add to the supply, at least in that market, and maybe make a small difference. And if I can make a small difference as a mayor, I feel like I'm successful, even if I don't turn around the national economy or even the regional economy for home building. So we're going to try and do things like that. We can add maybe not thousands of new housing units. We can certainly add hundreds. And if we can have young families who otherwise couldn't afford to buy a house, and there's hundreds of them that now can buy a house, I will count that as a success as a mayor.
Okay, so what is it that the government is offering as an incentive to the landowner to make this happen?
To be able to use their land for productive use. Right now, let's say I own a shopping center.
I'm going to change the zoning. I'm going to give you special rules that don't apply to other people.
Well, no, they apply, but right now, let's say I own a big shopping center, okay? And that shopping center, like a Fiesta Mall, but that's not a good example. Let's say it's a corner, a neighborhood shopping center that has seen better days, has a huge parking lot that never gets used, and there's nothing I can do with that as the owner because it's zoned for commercial purposes. And it's not succeeding as a commercial property. But I know if I could change that to residential purposes, I could sell that land, build houses, and make money off of it. Okay.
So the part I don't understand is the condition that means that the current landowner has to do it.
Yes.
That's the part I don't understand.
The current landowner who has commercial zoning can do nothing with that property other than tear down and rebuild that property as a commercial center.
Right.
Okay. They're not going to do that because the commercial center has failed.
Right.
All right. So that property sits vacant. You've been, how many empty commercial buildings have you been by, boarded up, that are eyesores, that are not doing anything to add to the economy, and they are drain on the owner's pocketbook because it can't succeed. Maybe it succeeded for 40 years as a shopping center, but now we're all buying from Amazon, or we're going somewhere else. There's a newer shopping center down the road. This property has seen better days, but the owner can do nothing with it because of the zoning. Well, I will walk in there and say, hey, if you want, I'm not going to force you, but if you want, I will work with you to change the zoning that allows you different uses. But our objective is we want to create affordable housing opportunities. And so if we're going to change this zoning for you, you're going to agree to some limits that will keep the cost down on construction. And one of those limits is I'm not going to change the residential just so you can throw it out for an auction so that the highest bidder can come in. And now, yes, we've changed to residential, but it's all market rate, $500,000 a unit residential. We've just lost it. We've missed our objective. So by offering the potential to this developer, to this landowner, to reuse their property and get economic activity on it, I will ask them to agree to certain controls that mean, you're going to be able to sell this as residential property. You're going to put a cap on that. You're only going to sell it for this amount. And see, that's better than nothing. Because right now, that landowner can't use the property. It's useless to him.
Yeah,
but
the thing that I didn't understand was that you could make zoning conditional for Jewel.
Yeah, so you can do it through, you can make zoning. It's not so much the zoning, but it might be like, for example, a development agreement. Sure. A lot of times we have zoning that says you can build houses, but the city and the developer will sit down and do an agreement called a development agreement that will define what type of houses, what type of amenities, and the things on that property. So it's a supplement to the actual zoning by right. It is a specific agreement. And I haven't figured out the details on that. We have to sit down with attorneys to figure out what we can do to keep this in place, but I'd at least like to try it. Yeah. And that's one thing we can do as a city. Like I said, if you drive around Mesa, you see a lot of these properties that are vacant, underutilized. They've turned into blight. I'd love to turn them into affordable housing opportunities.
Do you think that the city has a role in regulating non-owner single family homes. So Airbnbs, the BlackRocks coming in.
Yeah. I would say this, rather than take that approach, I think the city has not only the ability, but a responsibility to keep our neighborhoods way they are, to protect neighbors. That is an essential part of government, is to protect rights. Here you have a conflict, and that's the challenge in city government. You have on one hand property rights, the person or company that owns that property and wants to use it as a short-term rental, versus the rights of the neighbors who have the right of quiet enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be able to say, it's my property, I can do what I want, I can have late night parties, I can do drug deals, I can do whatever. Well, your rights end where you infringe on the rights of others. And the most challenging things that a city does is balancing those, because there's no black or white answer. It's all great. What I like to focus on as government is not status. If you say, would you outlaw short-term rentals? I say, well, it depends, because I don't like government getting into where they regulate status. I think government should regulate behavior. And so, for example, on short-term rentals, there's some short-term rentals in my neighborhood that I don't know are short-term rentals. You have a good owner who manages their property, and I can't tell you if that's a short-term rental or not. I don't care. All right. You have others where you have absentee owners, you have bad owners who rent to bad renters, who ruin a neighborhood because the short-term rental all of a sudden ends up being a total blight on the neighborhood. That's what I want to manage. Now, I understand that sometimes you can manage behavior by setting certain base rules and guardrails, and I think that's what we need to do. But we need to do it in a way that focuses on ensuring that we have good behavior, making the owner personally responsible for, sometimes these owners are corporations, or they don't even live in Arizona, much less Mesa.
Right.
Making them personally responsible for the activities in that house, making sure that we know who they are, and that the neighbors have a voice. And if the neighbors come in and say, listen, this has now created problems 4 nights in a row, that we have the ability to go in and shut that down, because now we're preserving and protecting the rights of the neighborhood. And I think a city, absolutely, one of its core duties is to protect the rights of individuals and neighborhoods. And if that means that someone has to give a little bit, I don't think that while you may have a right to own a house, you don't have an unlimited right to turn that house into a rental or anything else if it affects your neighbors. And we just need to find that balance.
The other issue is housing affordability. Let's say your commercial landowner works with you under this development deal and builds all these beautiful low-cost condos, and then a big investment company comes in and buys all the condos and turns them into Airbnbs. Like, now our affordable housing efforts
Yeah.
have been diminished by these investors. What do you
Well,
do?
that's one of the details I haven't yet figured out.
Got it.
It's easy, the first buyer. We can put things in deed restrictions and other things like that. And I think one of the things we can do, and this is through the development agreements, we'll put in deed restrictions that for the first X number of years, you cannot use it as a short-term rental. It has to be owner occupied. Those things you can work through deed restrictions. I haven't figured out the details. I'm sure there are some obstacles to overcome, because it's not that first buyer, it's the second and third buyer that is where you have it. And I built affordable first-time home buyer, and I saw neighborhoods that after 5 years went downhill because I sold the house to a young couple. We're happy to move in there. That's one of the greatest things, to see this young couple with young children afford their first house. After 5 or 6 years, they're ready to move on. They're earning more money, their family's growing, and so who do they sell it to on the second sale? And all too often, these neighborhoods then are sold to investors who turn that property into a rental. And there's nothing. Being a rental or an investment property rarely works out as well as being an owner occupied. There's no pride of ownership. There's no consistency in the neighborhood. And so that's what we have to figure out, is how do we control this so that the second and third owner is not a corporation or a speculator that comes in and buys now this property for a very relatively low price and turns around and flips it for a high price, and now all of a sudden you've turned an affordable neighborhood into unaffordable. Those are the things that I have to get with the city attorney and other to work out. I think that can be done. I'm an attorney, and I think we can be done, but there may be some legal obstacles that will make it difficult for us to do. But I got to try, because I agree with you. I used to do things. For example, when I built homes, we had a 10-year rule. I said, look at my subdivision, and if I go by in 10 years, I want to be able to take you and say, I built this 10 years ago, and be proud of what I built. So we did some things in our entry level neighborhoods that were very unique at the time. We, as a home builder, installed all the front yard landscaping and had the HOA take care of the front yard landscaping. Well, that was something nobody did.
Really?
And they said, why would you do that? And I go, well, here's why. Because if the second owner is a investor who turns into rental property, what's the first thing that happens? They let the landscaping go. Plants die, weeds grow up. They're not the kind of good owners we want. And I'm happy to say I built some of these communities 25 years ago. I go by them, and the front yard landscaping and the houses still looks nice. Why? Because the HOA takes care of it. I don't know which units in there are renter occupied, which are owner occupied, because they all look nice, high quality. And those are just some things, like I said, you can do that make a difference.
The next issue that voters really, really care about is the border and immigration, and specifically crime related to immigration.
Right.
So one question that I've got is, because I know there's so much fear marketing happening, I want to know, does Mesa have a criminal issue related to illegal immigration?
Historical, first of all, I get this question: is Mesa a sanctuary city? Never has been a sanctuary city, and I don't believe it ever will be a sanctuary city.
Can you define that for people?
Yeah, sanctuary city is where the city government declares that they will not, that they are a sanctuary for those who are here illegally, meaning they will not, if they encounter an illegal, they will not cooperate with federal immigration officials. They will not turn them over. They will, as a matter of fact, provide a complete refuge. No legal entanglements if you are an illegal, and the city will absolutely do that. And we will actually invite you in. Well, that was real easy for cities to do, like New York and Chicago, when they weren't by the border and they weren't encountering illegals like we were. They found out a little differently in the last 2 or 3 years, when all of a sudden they had literally New York well over 100,000 illegals who came there, and they realized, oh, wow, this is a problem, because it became their problem. Mesa's never been like that. As a matter of fact, when I was mayor, I was the mayor that negotiated with the Department of Homeland Security for our police officers who worked in the city jail to be certified on what's called Section 287G, and it is a section in the federal law that says that local jailers, police officers, that can be trained and certified to run immigration checks on anyone who is arrested, not for immigration issues, but let's say they're arrested for assault, for burglary, for whatever crime, and booked into our jail. Our officers will run an immigration check. And if they find that person to be in the country illegally, undocumented, they will inform Immigration and Control, ICE, and they will put what's called an immigration hold on this person. And this is something the sanctuary city will never do. They will never communicate. They won't even allow federal immigration officers in the city. But what that means is, if you are undocumented and you are arrested for burglary or for assault, your criminal case will proceed through the courts. And once that is adjudicated, you are then turned over to ICE, and then ICE can deport you. And we did this for one reason. It gets back to your basic message. Our job as a city is to keep you safe. It is to protect you from those who will do you harm. If I can use this tool, and I don't care who I don't care what your immigration status is. If you commit a crime and you hurt somebody in the city of Mesa, I want you gone. I want you in jail. I want you out of my city. And if I can use this as a tool to get somebody who's done harm out of the city, then absolutely I will use that. Now, to get back to your original question, which is the level of crime. Historically, regular crime in the undocumented community was actually either no different or substantially less than it was in the general population. And there was one good reason of that. They wanted to live in the shadows that kept them out of contact.
You gotta be careful. You don't
They
want
wanted to be careful. Wanted to be careful because if they encountered law enforcement, that means they would be deported.
Right.
That's changed in recent times, especially in the last 3 years, as we saw the borders literally opened up. We have all these people coming in claiming asylum who aren't really eligible for asylum, and it just both breaks my heart and maddens me that I see people showing up at the southern border at the fence, walking across, no attempt to keep them from entering. They're not Latino. They're not from Mexico or even Central America. They're from South America, Venezuela, the Middle East, China, and they come through Mexico because they know they can get in and declare asylum, and then they're in, and they release them in the communities. So we now have a problem that's worse than we did before, because now we don't know who's coming into our community. We do know that there are people who are intent on doing harm, gangs, even terrorists coming across. And so I think that the immigration community is been damaged by the open border policies of the current administration, because we don't really have a handle who's coming in. And I think there's, where the people, the vast majority, nearly all the people who used to come in were coming here for economic reasons and family reasons. They wanted to work. They actually were good citizens. They've committed crimes at a much lower rate. Now that's changed because you have people who are coming in here for, they have ulterior motives, they have bad reasons, and they're not good people. And we need to be able to sort those people out and focus on them. So I haven't looked at the most recent statistics, and that's one thing you got to be careful of immigration. There's a lot of if there's one or two incidents, it's blown up. But I think that it's a different situation than it was 10 years ago because of the asylum and the way it's been working and the ability for bad players to get across, in addition to what we would call our normal immigrants who are coming across here to find a better life.
So what can and will Mesa do? Anything different than what you've already said, which is screen any criminal and turn them over to ICE?
Well, no, I think what we do is that we need to be aware. For example, you read about recently up in Colorado that there were Venezuelan gangs operating. And I think our police are very much aware of these foreign gangs, and they treat them like domestic gangs. They track them, they try to find out who they are, and they try to identify those groups of people, immigrant or non-immigrant. I mean, to us, it's no different. If you're going to do harm in Mesa, we're going to track you. We're going to find you, and we're going to either put you in jail and prison, or we're going to turn you over and get you out of the country. And so that hasn't changed, because our first and foremost policy has always been to keep Masons safe from whatever source, whether you're a fifth generation U.S. citizen or a 10th generation, or you just walked across the border 6 days ago illegally. If you're going to do harm to our citizens, we're going to focus on you. And that's going to continue to be the emphasis of the city of Mesa, with a special additional awareness that there are now criminal gangs that are illegal that have come across the border that we need to be aware of and focus on.
Mesa Police Department has come under fire with lawsuits and claims of systematic use of excessive force. What is there? That's a headline and that's real, but can you describe what is the current state of Mesa Police and Mesa crime?
Mesa Police, I believe, from what I understand, I'm not there every day, So I'm getting what I get from talking with people. I will give our police department and our current chief, Chief Cost, really good marks for recognizing these problems when they came up, whether it's an excessive use of force or even someone who shoots somebody, like what happened, the horrible situation. And I believe they're trying to address that. I don't sense, like you do in some police departments, an arrogance. We find out that what happens in certain cities where there develops an arrogance, an us versus them. I don't sense that that's an overriding problem in Mesa. And like I said, I'm saying this as someone who isn't totally immersed in the information because I'm not in the city. I'm not mayor. And I like that. That they take it seriously. I like that they respond. Mesa, for a big city, actually does fairly well crime-wise. We have our areas of the city that have higher crime rates, and I'd like to address those. But Mesa, for a big city, is generally considered a safe city. But we are a big city. You know, you got 500 plus thousand people. There are older parts, there are high-income parts, low-income parts. We're going to have the challenges of a big city, and crime is one of those. We also are short police officers, not as bad as other departments, which says something about the city of Mesa and the Mesa PD, is that they've been much more successful in recruiting quality men and women, but we're still low. We still fall short, which means we don't have the coverage of police officers on the street that we'd like. I don't want that to ever be a budget issue. I think that's a systemic issue nationwide, especially since the George Floyd incidents. It's just all departments are having a tougher time recruiting and retaining good quality police officers. As I've said, public safety is the number one priority for me as mayor, for the city as a whole. I am comfortable with where the city of Mesa is now, but we can always improve. I don't sense that there's a huge crisis, but it is a human endeavor. You have humans, you put them in tough situations, you give them power and authority, and you're going to make human mistakes.
Right. I mean, yes.
I just want to make sure that we recognize that, and we don't have a culture that excuses those mistakes.
Right.
We have a culture that holds people accountable, gives them the support they need, training, equipment, recruitment, so that we attract the right people, we train them, we prepare them for the challenges they're going to encounter. And then when something happens, when there are mistakes made, when there's somebody out of line, that we deal with it in an accountable way. I don't think that dealing with bad officers, it makes you against anti-police. I think it makes you respect police.
Responsible.
You want, with a department that has, hundreds of sworn officers, you're going to have people that are bad apples, unfortunately. You're also going to have people that just flat out make mistakes. I can't even imagine what it's like being in these situations that our police officers find themselves in. And so our job is to support them, but to provide accountability that helps them be better. And that's what I'd like to make sure we do.
This is Billie Tarascio, owner of Win Without Law School and Modern Law. Win Without Law School is a program that operates nationally and helps people who are representing themselves or who just need more help. If you are in a family court case and you're feeling confused, you need direction, you need help figuring out questions to procedural or strategic issues, Win Without Law School can help. At Win Without Law School, you've got two experienced attorneys, me and my partner, Julie LeBenz, who can guide you through the court process and help you troubleshoot your case. You've got access to courses, planners, checklists, and live Q&A. Our live Q&A is where you can get help from us and your community. We also have a closed Facebook group just for members where you all can share your experience, share your pleadings, get advice, and mentorship. Join us today at winwithoutlawschool.com. That's winwithoutlawschool.com.
There's a couple more things I want to ask you, even though we're over time. There was a recent report that Mesa Public Schools are the worst in the country. Now, this is not an issue that voters put in their top 4 or 5. Voters of Arizona are not talking about our public education system, but it is a part of your campaign. It is something that you have discussed as being important. What do you think about this new report, and what do you think should be done?
You know, education is an issue that I near and dear to my heart. My father was a school superintendent for 35 years. My father was superintendent of schools in Mesa for 70. That's what brought me to Mesa when I was 11 years old, as my father became superintendent of schools. He's now been gone for about 10 years. And I can tell you that even before he left, he said, I don't recognize the educational system. It's changed so significantly. I respect the challenges that our Mesa Public School, Gilbert Schools, Queen Creek. We actually have 4 school districts that operate in Mesa: Mesa, Gilbert, Queen Creek, and Higley. And I respect the challenges that they face now with the breakdown in the family, parental support, English as a second language. We have a very high percentage of English second language students in our school systems, and also the challenges and opportunities that come with parental choice. You know, charter schools, vouchers. Unfortunately, when we talk about education, it seems to be a zero-sum game. This side good, this side bad. And I look at our educational system as being a complementary one. I believe in school choice, parental choice, but I believe you have to support every leg of that stool. I want our charter schools to succeed, our private schools and our public schools. We talk about school choice, and still over 80% of parents still choose their neighborhood public school. And yet, for some reason, proponents of school choice seem to believe they have to vilify public schools in order to succeed. And I don't believe that at all. I believe we can succeed all along. Mesa doesn't, the city government doesn't run the school district. But what we can do is that we can do everything we can to support our city, our school districts. And we do. We partner with them. We give them resources that we can. If we can get the word out, if we can support them, everything we can do. And we especially get involved in post-secondary. And I want to expand that. We started, when I was mayor the first time, a program called Mesa Counts on College. The purpose being to connect first-time college students with Mesa Community College and get them post-secondary so that they don't stop at high school, because that's where real economic growth comes from. And I don't care if it's a certificate or a college degree or an associate's, whatever it is. The data shows that if you go past high school graduation to some sort of additional post-secondary post-secondary specialized training, you will do much, much better economically. And that's where the city can help. I also think as mayor, I have a bully pulpit in encouraging healthy educational. I think we need to, at the state level, I wish we could do more funding for all of our schools, so we make sure we have those resources. Smaller classes, better teacher pay, facilities that actually work. And I will, as the mayor, use my bully pulpit in addition to what we can do as a city to encourage those kind of policies. And I think, you know, the mayor and the city government can just be the kind of cheerleader that shows people we recognize we can do better. What can we do as a city to help increase parental involvement, to make better and safer neighborhoods? If you don't live in a safe neighborhood, the idea that you're going to go to a school and succeed is ludicrous. So we take our role very seriously, just because we recognize that providing the kind of educational opportunity to kids depends upon the environment that they live in. And the city has a huge role in that. And we focus on that, saying, this neighborhood, I want every kid in this neighborhood to be able to walk to their school without fear. Well, that's on the city. And so there are things we can do, supporting, partnering, encouraging, and providing specific support. We love our resource officers. There are many who don't want resource officers in their schools. We want to be able to put them in schools so they can be a resource,
Right.
That they can help. And we find that when we have good resource officers in schools, especially at the junior high and high school level, the learning environment changes. It improves. Kids aren't afraid. And that's where we can work. Unfortunately, They've cut funding, and we have other needs in the city, and I'd love for things like that to be adequately funded, so we can ensure that our kids are safe on the way to school and in school.
Last question. I interviewed your opponent, Mark Freeman. He seems very well qualified. You are obviously very well qualified. Some of the chatter has been just how similar the two of you are. And I want to know from your perspective, what are the differences between the two of you? And how does Mesa look different under each of you?
That's a great question. Other than being stunningly good looking and handsome, which Mark and I both claim, and the fact that we are almost the same age. I've known Mark since high school, so I've known him for literally 50 years. He's a good man. I've known his wife Leanne, but there are huge differences between us, and I break these differences down into these areas: background, experience, leadership, trust. The difference in background is I come into this job specifically well trained and well prepared. My career, my education, I have a degree in accounting, an MBA, a law degree, things that have served me well in the past. I was in business and know the challenges of business and dealing with the city. Mark has been in government his whole life. He was a firefighter. And I know how to negotiate. I know how to get in the room. Just our backgrounds have prepared us differently to be the mayor of the 35th largest city in the U.S. with a budget of $2.6 billion. Our experience, I was mayor. Mark's been on the council for the last 8 years, but I was mayor for 6 years. I have a long list of successes as mayor, showing that I know this job. There's a very big difference between being the mayor and being a council member. I believe that I excelled as mayor. We kept the Cubs in Mesa, Chicago Cubs in Mesa, brought the Oakland A's. We negotiated that. We brought the GOP debate in 2012 to Mesa. We enticed Apple to invest $1 billion the first time that had happened in Mesa. We built roadways like State Route 24 8 years early and $96 million under budget. We streamlined government, and we created Facilitate, Don't Regulate. Those are successes I had, and the experience I had of a lot of success that I can point to and say, I did this on my watch. The other thing is that on the national level, I took Mesa into a whole different level. I'm the only Arizona mayor to be selected by his peers as president of the United States Conference of Mayors. I just feel so honored. But that also brought me into the White House face to face with the president on a consistent basis, so much so that my opponents, when I ran for governor, mocked me by being Obama's favorite mayor. Well, I was not, but I was probably Obama's favorite Republican mayor only because I was in there so often.
That's
advocating.
not a bad thing.
No, I'm in the White House advocating for the citizens of Mesa,
Right.
advocating conservative principles.
Totally.
Mark Freeman can't say that. The other thing is that there are things that have happened in the city of Mesa on his watch that have been gone. One of the complaints about both Northeast Mesa and Southeast Mesa is the lack of high-end retail and quality development. Especially in Southeast Mesa with Eastmark, where the demographics and the income levels are like yours in Gilbert. They're very high. And so people ask, well, why don't we have the kind of restaurants and stores? The city of Mesa had a consultant come in and address that question. And I'll quote from that report. The consultant found that developers shied away from locating in Mesa because of issues with planning and zoning, delays in approvals, and pushback from city stakeholders whose desires for certain sites did not meet the needs of the retail end user and development. Well, that happened on Mark Freeman's watch. I left, and Mesa was the preferred place to do business. Now businesses say, retail won't come to Mesa because of all these problems. That's a big difference in experience. Leadership. I mentioned the successes we had while I was mayor. We also were named by the Arizona Republic the most innovative city in Arizona, which was a shock to people when they talked about conservative Mesa. And Money Magazine, right as they left office, named Mesa one of the top 5 cities in America, big cities in America to live. Those things happened in a city that people basically had written off as being conservative, backwards, wide streets and narrow minds, and then trust. I've been honored to garner not only the endorsement but the encouragement of people like the firefighters, United Firefighters, who endorsed me and actually asked me to run over someone who had been a firefighter for 30 years. And when I asked them, why are you doing me? They said, well, we didn't always agree with you, but we worked with you through the Great Recession, tough times. You were always honest with us. We know you. We trust you. The Mesa Chamber of Commerce, the realtors, the home builders, nearly every institution that actually interviewed or that has endorsed me. And to me, that's a measure of trust. So, Mark Freeman's a good man. And I like to say, if I were having a heart attack, there's nobody I would trust more to take care of me than Mark Freeman, because great service. If I'm going to lead this 35th largest city in the country, I think that my experience and his experience are night and day. And that's how Mesa would be different. I can walk into that job and have the support and trust. In addition, all 5 current council members who have served with Mark are all endorsing me, because they say they know my leadership. And that starts from day one. We'll have different challenges and different opportunities than we did the first time I served as mayor, but the principles of leadership are the same. To me, that's different. The fact that I will step back in and be able to go to Washington and meet in the White House face to face and have done it before, that's a big difference. So Mesa will be different with me because I've done it. I know how things happen. I know how to change the bureaucracy because I wasn't part of the bureaucracy. Big differences between Mark Freeman and Scott Smith, even though I hope people think I'm a good man. He's a good man, and I just think I'd be a better mayor.
Thank you so much for all of your time today. And
thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion, and we will look forward to the election. Everybody needs to make sure that they are registered to vote.
Yep.
The deadline is October 7th, and check your voter status, and then make sure to show up at the polls or beforehand in November.
Thanks so much for listening to the Modern Arizona podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, make sure to download it, like it, leave a review, and share it with your friends. If you know someone who would be a good guest, or you would like to be on the Modern Arizona podcast, make sure to give us an email or reach out to us at mymodernlaw.com.